So welcome to Seattle Tax Amazon, how we win. I'm Chris from Seattle DSA. I'm co-chair of our Tax Amazon committee, along with Harris and Aram. And I'll be chairing this meeting along with Ali. And we're excited to see so many different organizations. We've got people here I know from Socialist Alternative, Transit Riders Union. I believe Councilmember Morales is here. Kshama Sawant is sick, but her chief of staff, Adam Ziemkoski, is here in her place, and 350 as well. And a bit about me. I grew up in the Rust Belt, and I experienced what it was like for government to give up its role of working for the people and instead acquiesce to the interests of whatever large employers were left after the collapse of the steel and manufacturing industries. So transportation, public housing funding, environmental protections against things like fracking were all weakened because the rich and powerful said, "Trust us, we know best." When things didn't get better, the blame was directed at those who were failed most by the powerful. They'd say, you know, you didn't get the right degree, you didn't work hard enough. And so here I am in Seattle. I'm a programmer, and in the 10 years I've lived here, I've seen the very people who make a city worth living get pushed to the margins. So rents, transit costs, sea levels, and healthcare costs keep going up. The billionaires who supposedly bring prosperity to the city say the same thing I heard growing up. Trust us, we know best. The only thing they know best is how to make power and wealth for themselves at the expense of everyone else. So I'm heartened to see all of you here with me today. It means we're not going to allow them to blame us for their failures. We're going to take power and start by taxing big business to fund what people want instead of what billionaires do. Our goal today is to hear what is going to mobilize you to fight for this. A Green New Deal, housing, transportation, we want to hear about it so that we can build a coalition that's fired up to win a ballot initiative campaign that taxes big business for a social good. The structure of this meeting is as follows. We'll have 5-minute opening remarks from my fellow co-chairs, Aram and Harris, along with the council members, Sawant's chief of staff, Katie from Transit Riders Union, and Alex from 350.org. After opening statements, I ask everyone who would like to speak to form a line. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. Particularly, we'd like to hear from at least one representative of every group that's interested in forming a coalition to tax big business for the public good, to find out what your group is interested in doing with money raised from a tax. Ali's going to help facilitate today, and I'd like her to introduce herself and give a note about process and recording. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ali. I am a DSA member, and I have a background working with social movements in Latin America and the US, and I do a lot of facilitation, so I'm going to tap in on those parts of the agenda. A quick note before we get started is just to say that obviously we are being recorded to sort of capture the richness of comments that are going to come out today. If you do not wish to be recorded, that is absolutely cool. Please let us know by saying so when you get up to speak, and Elliot will stop recording at that moment. All right, thanks. Chris, shall we start with speakers?
Yeah, Harris. Yeah, Harris is up next.
Hey everyone, wow, this thing is intense. My name is Harris. As was noted earlier, I'm one of the co-chairs of DSA's Tax Amazon and Big Business Committee. And I also am a worker at Amazon. I work in one of the warehouses. Today, as many people probably saw, Trump announced plans to further cut environmental protections around infrastructure. And meanwhile, as we know, Australia continues to burn with this disastrous impacts on the environment, animals, and people all across Australia have taken to the streets in protest. Donald Trump says, as we know, climate change does not exist. And I say, as somebody else, when Bernie Sanders says, billionaires should not exist. Seattle is home to an enormous amount of wealth, as we all know. And we need to build a movement to reverse Trump's tax cuts for the rich and reverse the housing, transit, and environmental crises, which of course are all part of the crisis of capitalism. 2020 is an incredibly exciting year for working class people because there is so much that we are going to be able to accomplish at the ballot and on the streets. Millions and millions and millions of people are going to want to drive Trump out of office, and they're going to vote this year, probably in historic numbers. And that means especially working class people, it means people of color, it means women, it means LGBTQ people, it means people who tend to vote progressive will be voting. And that means that we should go big, we should go really big this year. And I think taxing Amazon for a large amount of money in order to fund vital services is going big and something that will make a lot of people very excited to not only vote in November, but also to be part of this movement and help build this movement and turn it into something that lasts, whether we're talking about a ballot initiative or something passing through a council, something that lasts and helps build our power. So what can we do from this room today? Why are we all here? For me, the answer to that question is quite simple. We need a united movement in order to win. This is one of the lessons that I drew from the struggle to tax big business in 2018, and there are many lessons to learn there, and I hope people will come in about that. So this is just one of those. But in 2018, Amazon did its best and in fact succeeded at picking off forces who by all other logic should have been part of the Tax Amazon movement. Amazon succeeded at branding our efforts as a head tax and a tax on jobs when it was equivocally not that. And while it was Amazon that blackmailed Seattle by threatening to move out of the city, unfortunately, forces like the building trades caved into this blackmail rather than standing united with the movement. And that's understandable in some ways, but also we need to go beyond that because we can't afford to keep living in a city in this way. That's why I think we need a democratic coalition representing a broad range of community organizations, activists, unions, and local leaders who can come together to discuss, to debate, to make decisions, and to build this movement. At the same time, I think it's obvious we will not all agree 100% of the time. And it may be that as we struggle in this fight together to tax big business, that we have disagreements, and that those disagreements are incompatible with each other. And in those moments, we as activists, we have to be crystal clear that we can't sell ourselves out simply for the sake of unity. But that's a decision that we'll make at the time. And we don't want to ahead of time preclude our movement from being able to form a strong coalition. And that's our task right now. It's not an easy task, but I think it's an obvious one, and I think it's a necessary one. We work together wherever we agree, and where we don't agree, we build the movement independently in our own way. Amazon showed last year when they spent $1.5 million to buy our local elections that they will not pull any punches and that they do not respect democracy. And this MO is not the exception, as we all know. The reality is that they've built an empire of billions, the largest fortune the world has ever seen, by exploiting workers and exploiting the cities that they operate in. And I know this from personal experience. When my coworkers asked very, very nicely for changes in the warehouse, for simple things like extra fans during the heat of summer, and to be able to slow the belt down when workers needed to take a bathroom break, so that you can't keep on going with doing the same load with fewer workers, right? And Amazon very politely said no. And it took a summer of really, really bad press and also workers organizing for anything to change. Similarly, Amazon likes to brag to us workers and to the world about their $15 wages across the country, even where the minimum wage is lower than that. But where did this really come from? In Seattle, we know it especially clear. It came from the CTAC from CTAC in Seattle passing $15 minimum wages, this spreading across the country. And then when Bernie Sanders introduced the Stop Bezos Act, which is actually an acronym for something really complicated, but I love that he did that, which would have required businesses to pay taxes for every dollar that their workers were, requiring aid from the government in order to get by. That really, really scared Jeffy B, as we like to call him, and he caved into that pressure, and that was a victory. To me, it's clear that fighting for a tax on big business is an issue we can be united on, and we need this united movement, and it includes having labor on board, because this is a labor issue. Labor has every reason to support this. The more that workers can afford to stay in the city, the more that we can have vibrant unions that are fighting for things like wages and benefits, and unions fight for so much more than that. And maybe some other people are here, I don't recognize all the faces, but could talk about what their stance is on all of this. If we end up fighting for a tax to build social housing, it would be important that union housing is part of that. Our task is to unite labor and build a strong coalition, and also make it really hard for anybody in the city who claims to be progressive to not join our fight, because it's such an obvious fight to join. This is also an environmental justice issue, obviously. Whether we decide to go with a tax for transit, for social housing, for something else, this is part of a Seattle Green New Deal. And this is a racial justice issue, because the majority of my coworkers are people of color, and many of them are immigrants, and because environmental justice needs to be racial justice. And as I said before, our movement can't come with infinite concessions or deal making or anything like that, but we want to start from as united of a position as possible and see what kind of coalition we can build. I'm up here as a socialist, as part of Democratic Socialists of America. Not everyone here is. We have different ideas, I'm sure, on many things. But we're all here because we agree Amazon needs to pay, and big business needs to pay. People are dying on the street, they're dying in Australia, they're dying in boats, they're dying on the borders. They are dying in underfunded and money-making hospitals. Like I got a call from my friend today about that. And the only way that we're gonna win is by coming together. New York fought back and they won, pushing HQ2 out. The Bay Area fought back and won, and we can too, and I think this is the year to do it. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Alec Connon from 350 Seattle.
Hi everybody.
Hi. Hi.
How are you all? So yeah, my name's Alec Connon. I am an organizer with 350 Seattle, and I'm also 350 Seattle's co-lead on the Seattle for a Green New Deal campaign. In the first half of 2019, 350 Seattle and Got Green started talking about the need for a Seattle for a Green New Deal campaign. And I'll try and explain in just two reasons why we felt that our city needed that campaign. The first should be very obvious. We have a climate crisis that is a deep moral emergency. As someone who's dedicating their lives to climate justice and to the climate fight, I'm actually pretty rarely shocked by something that I read, but I actually read something yesterday that shocked me, and that was that in the Australian bushfires, 800 million animals have been burned to death. And just like, get your mind around that for a minute, like 800 million animal lives have been burned to death. And that's what the climate crisis looks like. That's coming on the back of Australia's hottest, driest year on record that have essentially made large parts of the country just a tinderbox waiting to go up. And so when we're talking about the climate crisis, that's what's at stake. So we knew that, and then in February there was Seattle's greenhouse gas inventory came out, in Seattle, this progressive city that's widely viewed as being an environmental leader. It turns out that our emissions are actually going up. That even in the most recent years that we have data for, our climate emissions are still going up. So we realized that despite talking a good game, despite saying all the right things, that what we were doing wasn't working, and so we needed a disruptive campaign that would really interrupt the narrative and open up the political space for us to do much more. So in June, 350 Seattle and Got Green, an environmental justice group in South Seattle, rooted in communities of colour that I'm sure the vast majority of you are familiar with, launched the campaign. We took about 150 people to Mayor Durkin's office, and we held a press conference in her office. She did not join us, despite an invitation to do so. And from there, we very quickly started seeing some really good wins. We saw the city attorney publicly commit to taking the fossil fuel industry to court for their criminal lies over the last 30 years. and we worked really closely, particularly with Councilmember O'Brien, who convened ourselves and Got Green and Puget Sound Sage and other stakeholders in weekly meetings, and drafted the Seattle for a Green New Deal resolution that was passed, and an ordinance that created a Green New Deal task force for the city. And as part of that, from the very beginning, we've known that a Green New Deal for Seattle is going to cost billions of dollars. The transition off of fossil fuels is going to cost us billions, but we have no choice because the other option is the collapse of civilization. And so over the last few weeks, we've been having lots of conversations with lots of different people about a big business tax and what that might look like, along with Katie at TRU and numerous others. We've been talking to folks at the Labour Council. We convened a meeting with the Labour Council before Christmas with several Labour leaders, folks from Front and Centre, the statewide environmental justice group, Puget Sound Sage, and from there we continued those conversations, and we're actually having another meeting in this building with the Labour Council on Monday to continue the conversation about a big business tax. And then we have been chatting with Adam and Councilmember Sawant and Socialist Alternative about a big business tax, and obviously with DSA and Harris and everyone else involved there. And those conversations, and having thought a lot about the need for a big business tax as part of a Green New Deal, have kind of led me to 4 perspectives that I want to share, just that are hopefully helpful as we're framing up this conversation. The first kind of thing that I want to share, the first point that I think is really important, is that we need to understand how powerful our opposition is. We're going up against some of the most powerful corporations on our planet. And that means that we need to be incredibly powerful ourselves. And that means that we need to figure out how to unite the left. We need to figure out how to build as broad and united and powerful coalition and movement as we possibly can. And that means that we need to be mobilizing climate folks, we need to be mobilizing environmental justice folks, we need to be mobilizing socialists, we need to be mobilizing working people and labor union members, we need to be mobilizing affordable housing advocates, and we need to be mobilizing everyone in Seattle who cares about justice. And we need to build a coalition that is capable of doing that. No one organization, no one council member can do it themselves. And the second thing I want to touch on is that our narrative needs to make people understand what they are getting by voting yes on this. And so I'm all in favor of tax Amazon. I think we should be shouting tax Amazon from the rooftops, and that's not enough. We need to say tax Amazon and make Seattle affordable, because then we get the people who will vote because they want to tax Amazon, and we'll get the people who want to make Seattle affordable and understand by voting yes on this, they're voting for affordability. We want to say tax Seattle and fund a Green New Deal, because then we know that climate people and the people that are freaked out about the climate crisis are going to vote yes, because they know by voting yes, they're going to get a Green New Deal. Saying tax Amazon alone doesn't tell people that story. So I want us to build on the tax Amazon narrative. Also, 2 more points just really quickly. I think this needs to be community-led, and I think this needs to be viewed by the broader community, by the broader Seattle population as being community-led. I think it's too easy to shoot down council members, and if it's perceived as being council-led and not broad-based climate, EJ, socialist, labour, coalition-led, it's going to be easier to shoot down. And of course, we love our council members, we want to work with them, we want to see them out front, and I think it's more powerful and strategic for it to be seen by the broader world as coming from a broader community coalition. And the final thing I just want to touch on is, my biggest fear of the Green New Deal, for the Green New Deal right now, is that it's co-opted and that people just see it as a branding thing. The mayor passed an executive order on Wednesday that was reported as being a Green New Deal executive order, and it was essentially meaningless. It did nothing to move us towards the 3 main goals of the Green New Deal, which is eliminate climate pollution by 2030, create thousands of good union jobs, and address current and historic injustices in the process. And so a couple of things that I think that a big business tax would have to do to be properly called a Green New Deal. One would be that if it is going to social housing, we need to make sure that that housing is being built with union labour, because that's one essential part of the Green New Deal. And we also need to make sure that it's being built in a sustainable way. This is a little bit wonky, but a huge portion of a building's life cycle climate impact comes in its construction. So if we're not building social housing with the best sustainable technology and materials, I don't think we can actually adequately call it a Green New Deal, because the actual building of it will have a huge climate impact. Additionally, we know that we need to do much more than just build housing as part of a Green New Deal. So I would advocate for, and in my meeting with Councilmember Sawant 2 days ago, heard our friends Nikita Oliver and Matt Remley advocate very clearly for this to fund more than just social housing. Right now in Seattle, there are 160,000 homes that get their heating from fossil fuels, and that needs to change, and that's going to cost money. So we would love to see part of this tax, the investment raised, paying for low-income communities and low-income homeowners to transition off of fossil fuels. And those are my 4 main things that I am very grateful to share for the room. And I just want to say very quickly, thank you to DSA for organising this, and thank you to all of the work that Socialist Alternative and Councilmember Sawant have done in driving us forward and getting us to this place where we're all excited to work together.
Where are you working now? I work at
Oh, okay, so you're trying to find out.
yeah, so we work with
Thanks, Alec. Next up, we have Adam Ziemkoski, Chief of Staff for Councilmember Sawant.
First of all, I want to extend a thank you to DSA and the organizers of this event for inviting Councilmember Sawant to speak. She offers her sincere apologies. She's unable to join us today because she's not well. And of course, warmly invites, as others already have, all of you to the launch of the Tax Amazon 2020 campaign on Monday, January 13th at 6 p.m. at Washington Hall. As you know, the event will be coupled with a swearing in for her 3rd term as Socialist in City Hall. And Sarah Nelson will be doing that, president of the Flight Attendants Association. We're so excited that both Socialist Alternative and Seattle Democratic Socialists of America are part of what is shaping up to genuinely be what others have mentioned, a broad movement citywide to tax Amazon and other big businesses to begin addressing the affordable housing crisis, and not to mention the escalating homelessness, among other things that should also, we agree, be discussed and on the table. The momentum for this bold policy has never been stronger, and we should be crystal clear, as others have also mentioned, that none of this would have been possible without our movement, the movement we've all built. And in many ways, the genesis of where we are today is the work that we've all done in the movement, including the People's Budget campaign of 2017, with the coalition Housing for All, with Transit Riders Union, Real Change, Socialist Alternative, DSA, Share Wheel, folks are here, Real Change, and other organizations under the banner of Stop the Sweeps of homeless neighbors. And we tied that at the time to the need to tax big business to build social housing and provide services. Now, we didn't win that vote that fall on Councilmember Sawant's Amazon tax proposal, but our movement had at that point put enough pressure so that council members, while voting no, also had to pledge to bring it back next year. And then in 2018, obviously, we won a unanimous vote, as everyone here knows, but then it was shamefully repealed by 7 of 9 council members. Now, the repeal of the Amazon taxes, Kshama and Social Alternatives, and many in the movement predicted, only emboldened big business and the right. And we saw that play out last year in the city council elections with Amazon and the Chamber of Commerce going after progressive candidates in every single district. and the fact that overwhelmingly progressive candidates won shows that Seattle voters are rejecting the massive spending and belligerence of Amazon and the Chamber of Commerce. No race was more emblematic of this than District 3, with Kshama's re-election campaign becoming the primary target of corporate media tax and corporate PAC money. We won re-election with the help of many of the people in this room because we inspired working people by boldly campaigning to tax Amazon, to build social housing, with Amazon employees actually and other tech workers folks might know among those donating the most in big numbers to Councilmember Sawant's campaign. Now CAPE's post-election poll has shown that that there's overwhelming support among Seattleites for taxing big business. We saw 75% support for that. Similarly, activists in New York and with the leadership of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez achieved a major victory over Bezos and Amazon's attempt to extort them to the tune of $3 billion in New York by powerfully standing up to them last year. And now the company has located jobs there anyway without any corporate handout. So the best strategy, what we see, to withstand and overcome what will inevitably be, as we all know and as Harris and others have correctly pointed out, serious opposition from big business, will be to build a grassroots democratic movement that boldly campaigns to tax Amazon and in doing so inspires working people, young people, those climate activists that Alec so effectively organizes time after time. Councilmember Sawant in our office has started the process of drafting a tax Amazon ordinance. But our movement has also begun to discuss, it's just begun, to discuss the ballot initiative that we should move forward with were the city council not to pass an ordinance. And we think it should be, as people have stated directly or implied, for a substantial amount, around $300 million. And it should fund the most urgent need, an expansion of social housing for working people with publicly owned, quality, energy-efficient homes built by union labor. And we've held 2 organizing meetings. Many of the folks here were at the one in December and then others at the one earlier this week. After the launch rally on the 13th, we're organizing, it was decided at these meetings, we're organizing an action conference. That's Saturday, January 25th, if folks want to put that on their calendar. We want hundreds of people just like us to join at that conference. It's just what we did in the Fight for 15 action conferences in 2014. At that conference, we should make these democratic decisions that folks are talking about are so necessary to build that unity in the movement about the key aspects of the ordinance and the ballot initiative. And as I said, this was how we launched our 15 Now ballot initiative in 2014. It's how we pressured the city council and made Seattle the first major city in the country to win 15. And just to close, Councilmember Sawant, the many activists and organizations, unions that were present at those organizing meetings, it's clear the same exact energy exists here. We think that we have another historic such opportunity to set a powerful example, not just here in Seattle, but the whole entire country, to tax big business, to build social housing, for a Green New Deal, for things that urgently are needed by working people. So I'm so excited to be here speaking. Thank you so much, DSA and others, for inviting us, and hopefully see you all Monday, 6 p.m., Washington Hall, and then on the 25th, also at Washington Hall, and let's fight for our city. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. Next up, we have Katie Wilson from the Transit Riders Union.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Katie Wilson, and I'm the General Secretary of the Transit Riders Union. I want to thank the DSA for putting this event on. This is an important discussion, and I think it's a valuable discussion to have in a public forum like this. I also want to make clear that my remarks today, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Transit Riders Union. I think our membership in general is extremely excited about the idea of doing a big business tax this year. At the same time, we still have some internal discussions to go through, and we haven't, come to a official position on this. And also, as many of you probably know, we're running a campaign called Orca for All this year, which is focused on passing a law. Many of you know. So, requiring large employers to subsidize transit for their workers. So that's going to be a big focus of our efforts. But we are also, in general, very excited about this, I think. So with that said, I think clearly we have a big opportunity this year to fight for and win an ambitious big business tax. There is, as other speakers have said, a lot of energy coming out of last year's city council elections, and that will continue in a lot of ways through this year with the national elections. And heading toward the November 2020 ballot, we can expect a very high turnout, hopefully an energetic and progressive turnout in Seattle. So there's a lot of opportunity. However, I also think it's possible that we could lose. And we don't want to lose, so it's important that we do it right. There are a lot of considerations which speakers so far have already mentioned. What kind of coalition is needed to win? Specifically thinking about labor. Harris mentioned the building trades. I think that's a very important thing to think about. How can we maximize the possibility that we get a lot of labor unions on board, and that we don't have a situation as happened with the head tax in 2018 where the building trades were vocally on the other side. And then I think also, what Alec said about the advantages of having an effort be visibly coming from the community, from a strong coalition of community-based organizations, as opposed to being seen as being led by a council member or by the council, I think is also an important consideration. I'm going to focus my remarks, I think, mostly on messaging, and maybe be intentionally a little bit of a wet blanket and state things more strongly than I even feel them, because I just think it's important to have kind of a robust discussion about what our message should be. So on Monday, Councilmember Sawant's office and Socialist Alternative are launching Tax Amazon campaign. I think there's a conversation to be had about whether that is strategic as a top-line message. As a counterpoint, in 2018 in San Francisco, a $300 million a year big business tax passed at the ballot with 60% support. And the message for that campaign, the campaign was called Our City, Our Home. So that's kind of a counterpoint of another kind of approach to messaging where you're leading with what is the good thing that this money is going to fund, the thing that we all agree is needed, and then kind of the second piece is, and we do that through a big business tax, as opposed to leading with Tax Amazon, and what we're going to fund is social housing or a Green New Deal. So just wanted to lay those two kind of possibilities out as ways to go about it. Clearly, Tax Amazon has some strong advantages, right? So it's a great slogan to rally the base. That's why we're all here. That's why there's going to be probably hundreds of people there on Monday. People who already want to tax Amazon, hell yeah, we want to tax Amazon. So it's a very energizing message, and it also has the advantage of making it very clear that this is not a tax on you and me. So it puts right out in front that we're taxing this big, multinational corporation, not regular working people. I think that Tax Amazon is consistent with a narrative that a large majority of Seattle's population agrees with, right? Which says corporations have this huge unaccountable power in our society. They've been accumulating wealth and power for decades, if not longer, and they're not paying federal taxes. They need to contribute more to the social good. Therefore, let's tax Amazon, right? I think that's a message that resonates strongly with a large majority of Seattle's voting population. However, you're kind of assuming that everyone has that narrative continually on a loop in their heads, which might be true for a lot of us. It's true for me, but it's not necessarily true for everyone in Seattle. So the risks, I think, of leading with that Tax Amazon slogan is that there are some other narratives that are also consistent with that slogan, which are much less popular. One of those is the greedy for taxes narrative, which came out very strongly during the head tax, which is our city, they just, they always want more tax money. It's never enough, even though they spend it wastefully. They can't even spend the money they have. So that narrative also ends in Tax Amazon. You have the envy narrative, right, which says this is just a bunch of socialists who are envious of successful businesses and individuals, the job creators. So we want to tear them down because we just hate them. And then there's the revenge narrative, right, which is we're going after Amazon because it's payback time, right? They tried to buy our city council elections, it's payback time. So, those narratives, I think, I'm cool with a couple of them at least, but I think that for your average kind of person who's not particularly engaged and not in this kind of space, those narratives can be very persuasive. And so one of my worries is just that we're creating openings for the opposition to come in and frame it in those ways. The media is not particularly nuanced. They're going to take that Tax Amazon and they're going to spin it how they want to spin it. I also think it's important just to be aware of a dynamic where in last fall's elections, Amazon was the aggressor. Amazon came in and they're like, we're going to buy your city council $1.5 million, right? And in a way that made all of the progressive council members into the underdogs. Everyone loves an underdog, right? And so I think there's a little bit of a danger of us becoming the aggressors with the Tax Amazon, which in a weird way could create a kind of sympathy for Amazon. So those are just some things to think about, I think, as we kind of hopefully jointly develop messaging for this campaign. And I think another risk just to consider is whether that messaging might hamper the ability to build a broad progressive coalition in Seattle in support. So just thinking about labor and other organizations that we might want to get on board with this that might not be so comfortable with that Tax Amazon messaging. I think that's about, well, and the other thing I want to say is just I'm not saying that it's destined to fail, right? I think to some extent it depends on what happens with the national elections. If Bernie wins the nomination and the kind of people versus the corporations is the national narrative for the rest of the year, fuck it, we might just win, right? That just carries it through the election. But that's not necessarily going to happen, right? So it's a gamble, is I guess what I'm saying. Now, of course, not everyone has to use the same messaging. Maybe there's different organizations or constellations of groups that are kind of going about this in a different way. But I do think there's a question of kind of what's that most prominent, what's picked up by the media, and we have to think about that. I think that's it. Again, excited to be here having this conversation, and let's tax Amazon.
Thanks, Katie. And finally, we have Councilmember Tammy Morales.
I forgot my glasses, damn it. Hi everyone, I want to thank DSA for helping organize this. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. I don't have much to add to the amazing things that everyone has said already, but I do want to just give a little bit of perspective on why this is an important issue for me. As you all know, I represent South Seattle, which is where we have a lot of South Seattle in the house. Yes, thank you. Hey, John. We have a huge disparity in this city. We have huge income inequality, and the people in my district feel that most acutely. We know that the current tax structure means that a family in Rainier Beach is taxed at 4 times the rate as a family in Laurelhurst. And those are the folks who are getting pushed out of the city because they can't afford to stay. Their businesses are getting pushed out. And so we need to be able to find a way to finance public services to help keep people in housing they can afford, to help businesses stay in the city, and to make sure that the displacement that we're experiencing in the city, that we can find a way to put an end to it. So this is really important. I will say that as somebody who has worked in a city budget office before, when I lived in New York 1,000 years ago, this is a hard thing to do. Financing public services is not easy. There are not unlimited resources, and there are huge needs, especially in a city that's growing as fast as ours. So it's really important that we find new sources of revenue that are more equitable, that make sure that low-income families aren't overburdened with funding our libraries and our streets and our fire department, and and helping build the social housing that we need. I think that some of the points that were made today are really important. Just thinking back on what happened the last time we tried this, it's going to be important that this is community-led, that it's really clear we have some level of united message, and that we're clear on the kinds of things that we want this money to do. Because otherwise it's going to be really easy for the opposition to start picking off the environmental groups or the folks advocating for housing and try to present and attack this movement as being scattered, not having a united message. Why would we, as Katie was saying, all the different narratives about why should we do this when the folks who are asking for this money don't even know what they want to do with it. So that comes from having the conversation we're about to have today, continuing that conversation and making sure that whatever we end up proposing comes with a groundswell of not just a movement, but a coalition of movements. All of the economic justice folks, the housing folks, the Green New Deal, the transportation. These movements are united not just on this issue, but in their actual what they are seeking in terms of justice and equity for folks who have been not invited to the table for far too long. So I'm excited to be here. I hope we have a productive conversation today, and I hope that all of you will bring 5 friends to the next gathering so that we can really start to have a meaningful conversation and come away from these meetings with clear next steps, so that as we start moving forward with actual legislation, the council knows that you're all out here and you have our backs, and that there is a united front waiting to make sure that this happens. So thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Organization, and once again, if you do not wish to be recorded, make sure to make that explicit. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Nicholson. I'm an activist with Socialist Alternative, and thanks DSA for hosting this event. This is really awesome, and I really appreciate all of the opening speakers just being really candid about both the opportunities that we have, but also the potential challenges facing the movement and the things that we really do need to discuss out and gain clarity on, because we know there is going to be a huge tidal wave of lies and misinformation and attempts to divide the movement so that we're not successful. And I think one issue that was brought up that I think is really important is this question of, do we want to use the phrase tax Amazon, which is very sharp, right? It's very strong, or do we want to try and use a slogan or package it in a way that maybe sounds more like, positive, or something about building the community, something about providing for our neighbors, things like that. And I think there's really good arguments to be made on both sides. But personally, I think we would actually really be doing ourselves a disservice as a movement if we were to step back from the really strong language of tax Amazon. And just the first thing to be concrete about it, I think that is an extremely popular slogan right now amongst not just the people in this room, but amongst broader layers of working folks in Seattle. And I think we saw that in the results of the recent city council elections. But also there was a poll that came out recently of Seattle residents asking if people support taxing big business. And it was overwhelmingly, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like 75% of people said, yes, I support taxing big business. So I don't think we need to be afraid of using that strong language. And Katie is totally right that the corporate media, establishment politicians, big business, they will absolutely try to twist that to mean we're just out for revenge, we're just greedy and want your money. But I think we can really boldly respond to those attacks when they're made. And in reality, even if we call ourselves housing for our neighbors, they're still going to attack us, and they're still going to try to twist what we're doing and say that we're just greedy, regardless of what we call ourselves. So I would advocate for using the language that we know is revving people up, is turning people out to vote in higher numbers than they've ever done before in our city council elections, that's revving people up for the Bernie Sanders campaign, and that is tax big business, tax the rich, not kind of the more general slogans around providing for our community, although that is also something people want to do. I think for a lot of folks, being really sharp about it is what makes it stand out as something that's different from the status quo, right? It's different, it's a fighting movement that's actually gonna provide. So, yeah, that's it.
Dave Schultz with the Transit Riders Union, DSA, and a little bit with Seattle Neighborhood Greenways. I would say go big or go home, okay? Because in case it gets whittled down, at least we'll have something, but I think we gotta go big initially. And I think it needs to be more things than just social housing, because that kind of takes a little while to get, once the tax is passed, to collect the tax and get the buildings underway. But it shouldn't be like 100 things. It should be maybe social housing, transit, and environmental things, but making sure that when the tax is passed, that people can see the results as soon as possible. Thank you.
My name is Stefan, I'm with DSA. I think there is a need to discuss strategy here. I think first of all, we're in the labor temple, but this is a coalition that we have so far of people who want to move this forward, of socialists, of left-wing activists, and that's good, that's decisive, but we're also quite diverse. I think the first thing is, if we work together, it depends that we have a coalition where we value each other's roles. I'm glad that here you, SA is here, DSA is here. I want to activate a lot of DSA members in this. I want to build a socialist movement out of this. I want to build power for the working class out of this campaign. And I think we can. I think we need to work together. And this means also building a coalition where we mutually listen to each other and try to move forward. No one has a veto about it in our group, but I think it's decisive for us to move together forward and build such a coalition. And the second thing is, I think, the strategy of such a coalition needs to be to make it as hard as possible for anyone who calls himself in any way progressive or labor to not support us. I think that's quite decisive. I believe that the 2018 effort to implement a tax was stopped on two levels. First of all, there was no grassroots movement. And we are here in this room, we are strong enough to start to build a very powerful grassroots movement. We can do this. But if we end up in October and we've got the building trades door knocking against us, and labor is quiet, and we let the labor leaders, the more conservative labor leaders, off the hook, and they were never asked to support us, they were never invited, we did not reach out to them, we did not put pressure on them, we did not try to have a conversation open in front of the working people of Seattle with them, then we are screwed, we lose despite our efforts. And that's where I think we need to build a grassroots movement where I don't have to wait for anybody, but we should reach out. I just want to give the example of 15 Now, how we won 15 in Seattle. There was a coalition with labor, and I was a 15 Now activist. We worked together, and at a point of time when it was needed to file a ballot initiative, to be able to win something even if the city council would not act, labor kicked us out of the coalition. They didn't want that. What did we do? Did we blame them that they are right-wing conservative labor leaders? They were right-wing conservative labor leaders involved in that. But we knew that was our problem, not their problem. We kept it very friendly. We fought back. We appealed to the union members. We opened up a dialogue in the city with them. We put them on the spot. A month later, we won a majority in the MLK Labor Council. That's the delegation of the AFL-CIO members here in Seattle. And they voted for our strategy to move forward. I think that's the spirit that we need in this effort. We need a coalition where we work together, aim for consensus, work together to build a grassroots movement without waiting for anybody. But we need to put pressure, friendly pressure, embracing other people, embracing people, labor leaders as well, to have an appeal to working people all over the city to unite a movement that is strong enough to beat Jeff Bezos and many more this years. Link it to the attack, to the whole question of Trump. He was letting the big business off the hook with this so-called tax reform. We can undo that. We can link this to a Green New Deal. We can make a lot happen in this year and hopefully also get a socialist elected to the White House.
Hello everyone, my name is Thomas, I'm a member of SA. So the number that was thrown out there was $300 million. In order to put that into context, the GDP of Seattle is $60 billion, so that's about 0.5% of Seattle GDP in taxes. I do not think that that is a big enough scale for what it is that we need to do in this city, and I don't think that we can do the kinds of things that we want to do. We're gonna get together, we're gonna go, and we're gonna. I mean, let's just understand. It's something might go through the council. It's highly likely that it'll go to a ballot initiative, and if it does go through the council, it'll only go through because we know that we're going to take it to a ballot initiative, and the council bends and decides to vote for it instead of having the ballot initiative. So if we're all going to get together and go out and collect signatures and then knock on doors and put in all of this effort, I think it's important for us to have a bigger vision of what it is that we want to do in the city. I also agree with some of the previous speakers who were saying that we should also think about repealing other taxes. I think that helps us escape from the tax and spend message. For example, the average renter pays about $700 in property tax in the city. What if we were to, per year, what if we were to give people a tax credit and then partially repeal property tax for renters and send that money to the renters as part of our package, right? That ends up providing people with up to $700 per year based off of what they have to pay to live. The other thing is, transit takes about 0.5% of GDP. So that means that if we took this money, this $300 million, we would just be paying for transit alone. So I really do think that we need to think bigger. The number that I have in my head is something more like $2 billion. And I think that that's the kind of number that we should really think about. And I know that people may think that's funny, but that's the kind of scale that we need to be thinking for this. And also, I don't care about saying we want to get revenge on Amazon. Sometimes people like to see Bill killed.
Some of you know me, my name is Justin Baird, and I'm actually here as an individual and also representing the board members, but not necessarily the entire organization yet, of the Economic Justice Caucus of the State Democratic Party and the Washington State Progressive Caucus. And the reason why I say that it's not the whole organization yet is that we as a board are one of the co-hosts and sponsors of Monday's Tax Amazon event. But we have not yet, because I'm always about stakeholders, taken to the membership to make sure they're all on board. So I appreciate the comment somebody made earlier. But while I've been saying I'm going to speak and not necessarily represent the org, every single member that heard about it is like filling up my phone with, yes, get up there. We are fully in support of this movement, and we will get more involved as we can make sure that everybody sees how they want to do that. But we are fully on board for Monday. And one of the reasons why our group right now, and you haven't heard about this much yet, is going to be looking to change our organization is that we have been under fire from the State Democratic Party for quite some time because unlike the rest of their constituent caucuses, which should involve listening to the individual voices, we have our own legally established PAC. And when we happened to endorse someone like we did in 2016, because Bernie Sanders, who got 73% of our delegates, when we endorsed him as an organization, we got pushed back quite a bit. And even now, because I share the bios for the people running for the DNC, I've gotten 3 calls from Tina Podlodowski today saying I should not have shared those when in fact, it's all about transparency. So I hope to see more of these organizations and you'll see more of us because we are going to be basically separating into 2 groups, the one that sits with the Dems and the one that does everything the Dems doesn't want us to do, and we're going to be there on the front lines with you.
Good afternoon, my name is Julia Buck. I'm a member of 350 Seattle as well as DSA, and I'm also a member of the Finney Neighborhood Association. I just wanted to comment that I think it would be helpful if perhaps there were some degree of participatory budgeting included with the funds. I think about my own neighborhood, and I think about our pea patch that grows fresh vegetables that go to the Ballard Food Bank, and I think about my neighbors who want to get rid of the cars on their street and make it into a greenway. And I think that with honestly a very, very small amount of money, these green projects could move forward. And I think that that would lead to tremendous investment. I know that Seattle Parks Commission has the opportunity to vote for various projects for park improvements. And I know that that's a really great way to get people feel as if they are involved and if they have a voice in terms of what sort of problems they'd like to see solved. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Philip. I'm a member of Seattle Democratic Socialists of America. And this speaker seems to
Hold the microphone. Yeah.
There we go. I think we all in this room, there's an overwhelming agreement that there's a need and that we want in 2020, this is the year to tax big business, to raise the largest possible tax to fund vital social services. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time in this room talking about that. I think the key question for us in this room is, what is our strategy? How do we have the best chance of winning the largest possible tax? And from my perspective, I think no matter how big the tax is, it's not going to be sufficient. I think the battle is going to continue after 2020. And from my perspective, a critical component, subcomponent of that, within the overall framework of winning the biggest gains possible in 2020, is that we build the power of working people, that we build a vibrant socialist movement within that, and that we are in a better position to continue the fight in 2021 and 2022, to have a political revolution against this billionaire class and overthrow them. But within the framework of 2020, how do we have the best chance of building the strongest movement that sets us up also after 2020? I think we absolutely can win a major tax on big business this year, but we have to look, who are we in this room? I think we have a very good start of activists, of left-wing organizations, of socialists. And I don't mean to diminish that at all. I think that's an excellent starting point for building the kind of grassroots effort we need. I don't think the coalition in this room on its own has the power necessarily to be confident we can defeat big business at the ballot. I think we can win that power. But I think a critical thing is we need to make sure all the organizations that are supposed to represent working people, all the politicians who claim to be progressive, they need to be united with us, throwing their weight into this struggle. And with that, I'm absolutely confident we can just deliver a decisive blow to Jeff Bezos and Amazon. But I agree with one of the other speakers, we have to learn some of the lessons of previous struggles. If, outrageously, some of our unions, funded with our dues, supposed to represent working people, are not supporting us, if some of our progressive representatives who are elected with a progressive mandate are not supporting us, we have a problem. We might not win at the ballot in 2020. I don't think also that sets us up for building a stronger movement after 2020. That was the point came up in the discussion about lessons, how socialists and activists played a critical role in winning 15 in Seattle in 2014. I was very much part of that effort. One of the conclusions we drew, unfortunately, in the fight for 15 is those of us in 15 now thought we wanted to go to the ballot in November 2014 to win a stronger 15 than what the compromise that the mayor delivered. Unfortunately, we were not strong enough in the labor movement, and the labor leaders, the vast majority of them, were not interested in really waging a fight. And we drew the conclusion in the 15 Now coalition, if people remember, that we were not strong enough to go to the ballot in November 2014 without the backing of the labor movement. And that was not because we were lackeys of the labor leaders. That was because we had to have an accurate sense of things. So I think to overcome that barrier, given the strength that we have and the lack of strength we have, I think it's very important to bring the activist left forces together. And that has to be on a democratic basis, where it's not one organization just steamrolling things or making announcements in the name of the movement, but a representative coalition comes together that can begin a grassroots movement without the labor leaders if they choose not to be part of it, but can build a groundswell that can force them later to join in our effort.
Wow, how to compete after that. Whew. Hi, my name is Travis Johnson and I'm part of the organization Nicholsville. We are the largest tiny home community in the greater Seattle area, which is a great thing. Wow, I do believe that at the beginning of everything thing in my heart. I do believe that big business should be taxed. I think that they get away with a lot. I think they get away with pretty much anything they want because they're big, they're powerful, they got money. I think Jeff Bezos should be a millionaire instead of a billionaire because, like, at the end of the day, people, at the end of the day, it's like, what are you going to do with that much money? Like, seriously, dude, like, you buy a house, you buy a car, you're done, dude. Get over it. It's like, wow. Lately, I've been going to all these meetings about taxing Amazon and doing all this stuff. And it's really sounding great from what I've been hearing. And as a homeless person, you don't usually hear people sticking up for you. But at these meetings, like, there's been a lot of positive feedback about how people really think that the homeless people should have equal rights. And I personally think that the Transit Riders Unions is a great organization. I have talked to some of their members and they're pretty awesome people. My head boss, who just happens to be in the audience today, he's wearing the t-shirt. So I think at the top of the day, it is all good to be part of this movement. This is a really good, and by the way, I'm a Republican and I'm voting for Bernie Sanders. I was going to vote for him during the 2000 election, but like he dropped out to Hillary and I said, I don't want Hillary, I want Bernie. I was feeling the burn, man. I was feeling the burn. You know, we all were feeling the burn. Hey, I was feeling the burn. Everybody was like, who are you voting for? I said, I'm voting for Bernie Sanders. I don't know about you. I don't know about those left-wing. And I don't even get how even Donald Trump even got like put in president. Because wasn't he like in the 90s doing professional wrestling? Like I'm not even gonna go there. We hate him. He should be really impeached. I even as a Republican, I say that. Even as a Republican, I say that. Because he's totally left-wing. Yeah, I feel the burn, and I have to go, but my name is Travis Johnson, and thank you all for listening to me, and we will defeat Amazon, because we are the people of Seattle, not Amazonia. Thank you, have a great day.
Hi there, my name is Sue Hildreth, and I'm with Seattle DSA's Green New Deal Committee. And I think that a Green New Deal means green jobs now, and we need to get started. And I think that that narrative unifies the working class. Bernie is surging with class struggle narrative that is framed in the benefits to working people. Then everyone has skin in the game. The climate situation, the climate narrative will not be something that we are asking people to do for someone else. We're asking it to do it for themselves. It affects everyone. The nature of capitalism has been exposed to everyone active in halting and reversing climate change. If we do not focus on this narrative, we are missing an enormous opportunity to succeed at this ballot initiative. Maximizing and highlighting carbon reduction will dramatically increase the number of signature gatherers, the ease of gathering signatures, and the number of petition signers. The entire concept of a Green New Deal has embedded in every version that you look at, including the wonderful narrative of the Seattle for a Green New Deal, the social justice narrative, the anti-displacement narrative. It's woven in to a Green New Deal. It needs to be highlighted in this petition, this initiative effort. as well. And Seattle Green New Deal, Seattle for a Green New Deal's narrative provides a lot of resources for us to craft an effective, a narrative for an effective ballot initiative. If we leave this narrative out, we are missing an enormous opportunity referred to by Phil to build our critical socialist movement, and with it, a positive vision of the future for very, very large numbers of people. Not everybody in this room may be a socialist, but the people who are part of the climate movement are anti-capitalist and looking for a positive vision of the future. We as socialists are strong in our convictions. We do not need sharp language to convince ourselves that we are socialists, if that results in passing up the opportunity to build a large movement out of this effort for the future.
A quick process note. If you're wondering, if you're like sort of teetering on the edge of wanting to speak or not, and you don't have necessarily a really definitive statement to make, but more some questions you're struggling with, trade-offs that you see, please also, that's a valid thing to add. Please join the line, especially if we haven't heard from anyone from your organization or neighborhood, etc. Thanks.
Hi, my name is John Manella. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, and I also sit on the board of the Tenants Union of Washington. And I know that the tenants, we are ready for a fight. And whenever I breathe the words tax Amazon around the Tenants Union, people's heads just spin right around. They're ready to go. I was putting up a flyer the other day for the tax Amazon for Monday's rally, and somebody walked by and they were like, tax Amazon, fuck yeah, and kept walking to the bus. It was amazing, it was amazing. So I think that people are ready to go, but questions like messaging and that kind of stuff, we can figure that out together. Like Harris said, we're gonna have disagreements and there's gonna be some principled ones too, but right now is the time for unity and to make sure that we're all standing together. One point that I do wanna make is that we need to make sure that there is some kind of racial justice component within, thank you, within this. So that comes to be a question of who gets to live in these buildings. And I think it's important that we have as broad a base, a pool of people that get to live there as possible. Working class people should be able to live in these buildings that we're taxing Amazon for. $1 billion tax, by the way, that sounds a little bit better to me. But something that, there's a new housing development called Jackson Heights. It's an affordable place, and in order to get around some of the racial laws around renting, which are there for very good reason, they have a lottery system in which you, if you have familial ties to the community before the year 2000, you get extra bonus points for the lottery. So you get a higher chance of living in these affordable places if your family is one of the families that have lived in that area for generations, building it up and making sure that Seattle is a really cool place to live. And we need to think, it's not that we need to think carefully about including something like that, it's that it's absolutely required that we have something like that in there. And that's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Hey, my name is Thomas. I work with TRU a little bit. I have heard allusions to the sort of legislative strategy, both a ballot measure and trying to pass something through the council. So it's not really clear to me. That's a question I'm putting out there. If there's a preference, if anybody's decided one way or the other. I just wanted to speak a little bit, I think, to the downsides of a ballot measure and the upsides of trying to push something through the council. I've worked on some ballot measures to try to stop fracking, and so we have a similar multi-billion-dollar industry on the other side of that. Probably goes without saying, but they will spend whatever it takes to change those poll numbers. We had poll numbers in the 70s supporting measures to ban fracking, and that measure ended up losing 3 months after, $40 million worth of ad buys and other things from the oil and gas industry. It's resource intensive to try to get something on the ballot,
And I think that actually strategically organizing district by district, we have 7 districts, that's not that many. We have a bunch of organizations here with membership and connections in each of those districts, doing some power mapping and some strategic organizing in each of those districts, I think would be a better use of resources than everything it would take to try to get on the ballot and then to try to contact, you know, the tens of thousands of people we need to contact before a vote. I agree with a lot of the points about messaging and policy. The calendar for the election kind of rushes that, I think, and I would hate to see any of these points be lost because there was a filing deadline or something like that. I think one of the pros of going the council route, besides the ability to organize district by district, is a lot of us put in a lot of effort to try to elect people to the council last year that made commitments to these kind of policies. And I think it's kind of letting council members off the hook if we say, great, you're in office, thanks, but now we're gonna let you not have to vote on this really important thing. We should hold their feet to the fire, like Councilmember Morales said. We can win this, I think, with some really strategic organizing that holds our elected officials accountable, and I think that's a better use of resources, regardless of the policy or messaging we decide on. Thanks.
My name's Eva, and I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, and I'll be working on a Tax Amazon campaign, and I think points have been made about why this is really a fight to tax Amazon, and that framing is really important, especially coming out of the city council elections. And yeah, just to confirm the point that Kaylin made earlier, it was 75% support in a poll for taxing big business, and I think we need to be really clear that there's no scenario where Amazon and Seattle's biggest businesses are just gonna lie down and accept paying more taxes. Like, we have countless examples of how far Amazon has gone to bully working people, from HQ2 in New York to retaliating against workers who stood up for climate justice. And we saw how hard they fought and the big stink they raised in 2018 over what really was just a really small tax on their massive, huge profits. And yeah, just lowering the number it was for did not stop them in any way from being ruthless and relentless. So I think how we win shouldn't be based on trying to prevent Amazon and other forces who are hostile to working people from fighting back, or to stop the corporate media from whipping up fear. We know that they're going to do these things, but instead we need to really base our strategy on how strong of a movement we can build around. And yeah, I totally agree with the points about the need for unity, and I think we need this unity based on a fighting strategy, and a strategy that doesn't think we can just negotiate with Amazon and big business, which is not a winning strategy in any way. And yeah, to put forward, I think it's really important to put forward something that is really inspiring. I don't think we want to get too high, like $1 billion or something. I think does give terrain for people to say that's too high, but something like 300 million plus that can really make a huge difference in people's lives. Our city is extremely unaffordable, and that kind of money would be able to make a big difference in funding social housing, making a big difference in working people's lives. And I think it's really important, again, that everybody who agrees for a fighting strategy comes out on Monday night. I think it's really exciting that Councilmember Sawant is using this platform of her inauguration, where Sarah Nelson, this really badass union leader who's really inspiring, has agreed to speak. There's lots of community activists and organizations and rank and file workers who are going to be at that event, and to have hundreds of people out saying we're prepared to fight for and win a tax on Amazon this year. We're going to come together and make democratic decisions about what kind of ballot initiative we can put forward. And just on the last point that was made, I think it is important that we have a ballot initiative as a tool our movement can use that does not in any way stop City Council from passing a tax, which, I mean, that would be awesome too. But I don't think we should leave it to them, because we saw in 2018 the way they repealed it, and we want to have a tool we can keep going with.
Hi, my name is Linda. I'm a member of DSA. And I think that we need to be providing in this initiative something for everybody in the city.
Because I think that if it's just, I think social housing is super, super important, but if it's just social housing, there are a lot of people who are going to say, what's in it for me? And yes, we would like them to be just, you know, hey, yeah, because everybody deserves it, but it's just not how things are. I think that we also, so I think that transit is super important. It addresses environmental issues. I think that it also addresses people who are living in outlying communities and stuff like that who have to spend a lot of time traveling. I think that we should be going for free transit. If we just go for subsidies from the big businesses, then what about the people who aren't working for a big company? Those are, you know, maybe some of the lower income people and so on. They deserve not to be paying a lot. As a senior citizen who only pays $1 per bus trip, I can tell you it really makes a big difference when you're paying very little or nothing versus having to pay, is it $2.75 now and so on. Yeah, I don't mind getting on the bus to just, you know, go for a mile, even though I'm super capable of walking that. I would also like to see some express buses going to the outlying communities. The idea of having to travel 35 bus stops to get where I'm going is like, I've got a car, I think I'm gonna just take the car because I can't sit on a bus for that many stops. So, and these are gonna serve some of the people who have been pushed out of Seattle. I think we also need to look at this in terms of both operational and capital expenditures. So how building housing, and yes, sustainable, of course, that's a capital expenditure, whereas improving our bus system and so on and making it free or, you know, really ridiculously inexpensive for everybody is an operational thing. So that's a cost that's going to happen every year. Housing, if we threw all the money at housing and so on, actually, hopefully, in a couple of years, we would have solved our problem and so on. But we're going to be taxing every single year, and so I think that we ought to sort of balance it between stuff that, like transit, that's going to happen all the time versus building the housing. And then a couple of small things, as Julia said, that aren't going to take a hell of a lot of money but make a difference in people's lives. We can't move people into social housing just as soon as the initiative is passed. What about the people who are living in the tent cities, who have no sanitation? Like, how about some honey buckets for them? Give them some dignity. How about trash pickup? You know, we complain about, oh, they're so messy and just leaving their trash all over the place. Well, how about let's help them? So I think that there are just lots of little things that we can do, as Julia had said. And of course, we need to, you know, just be focusing on job creation, because otherwise that's just a point that Amazon's going to say that we're losing jobs.
Thanks. Robert McKay. I'm a member of the Seattle Education Association. I work with kiddos up in McClure Middle School in Queen Anne, also a TRU member. And I just want to start with answering a couple points that have been made, but just start with my own experience, which is working in a school system where like fully 7% of our students, per the last available data, are homeless. And a lot more of the kiddos that I work with, you know, have moved multiple times, and it really, you know, disrupts learning. And I think that, you know, as educators and kids, we're pretty media-friendly faces for the movement. And I think that, you know, the sort of shop floor organizing that's been mentioned to sort of head off any kind of conservatism on the part of our labor leadership, that's really hard work. And I think that if we can do that, you know, we all have to sort of dedicate ourselves to doing that work. I mean, I work in a pretty bougie neighborhood school, and a lot of my colleagues are, you know, small property owners, quite attached to their cars, their houses, right, which is fine. And, you know, having to learn how to talk to those people who certainly don't share kind of the politics in this room is something that we all have to kind of dedicate ourselves to, I think. It's really not easy work. I think that yeah, I'd love to see some research around like which schools have some of the biggest sort of displacement issues, and sort of bringing in the educator and like family communities with, you know, forums or whatever, get my union involved to try and target some of those you know, displacement issues that are really clear cut. And I think that, just addressing like this, heading off the narrative that the leftists don't know what they want to do with the money, and it's all these different things, and the Green New Deal is a grab bag and all that sort of thing. I think that we need to have a clear intersectional narrative about urban space, whose city it is, that really connects transit and housing, because they are super connected, and just have really good plans for implementation. And messaging around that. I think last time, I still hear from colleagues and stuff, well, they didn't know what they were going to do with the money. Well, we did, but it wasn't messaged well, right, on the head tax. So I'd love to see, I don't know where I fall on this ballot versus city council thing, but I do think that, a ballot measure, it is expensive and it's kind of mobilizing, right? Maybe we need that stick to hold to cover the council members, and maybe it builds some redundancy in. But I also think that, just getting people's signatures, it's hard to have a really kind of deep organizing conversation, and I'd love to see us, whichever way we go, do some really good community forums where we're doing political education, we're identifying organic leaders in communities that tend to be, like I was great to see Finney Ridge, neighborhood association member here, like those kinds of places, which we've done some as TRU, and you can, if you have a deep conversation with people in their living room with peers that frames this as a pro-homeowner issue, that channels some of that anti-car tab sentiment or whatever into, this is about getting, rolling back or defending against more regressive taxes and protecting smallholders. I think that would be great.
Hey, I'm Rami Khalil from DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. So I'm really excited about this campaign. I'm excited to see everyone here. I think we do have really big opportunities with this campaign. There's a lot of anger at Amazon because of the way they extorted New York and other places when they were trying to establish their headquarters too, their second headquarters. And the way they overturned the Amazon tax we passed over a year ago, and the way they tried to buy the city council elections. So I think having a strong grassroots campaign right now to go after Amazon is actually going to be very popular, as we saw with the poll that showed that 75% of Seattleites want to tax big corporations to fund vital services, and we saw with the city council elections where all of the Amazon-supported candidates, I think all of them, maybe all but one, were defeated. So I think that we have a lot of reason to be optimistic, and we also have a good start with all the organizations represented here and all the activists presented here. But I agree with folks that have said, like Eva, who was saying, like we're going to face ruthless opposition from Amazon and other big corporations. So we absolutely need to be prepared for these extremely wealthy corporations to come after this. But that in itself will anger people if they do that yet again. That's going to provoke a backlash from the local communities. So, and it'll get national news. And so I think we're embarking on a historic campaign with a lot of blows and counter blows, and it's gonna politicize people and get people interested and people talking in the town. So I think we have a lot of reason to be optimistic. I think it is clear that they will use that jobs argument and try to divide us again and divide the labor movement, which I think is going to be important. And so I agree that we need to do everything we can to bring in the labor unions and more communities of color and so forth, as many groups as possible. On the question of like the building trades union that gets jobs from Amazon because they're building so much construction all the time, I think that they're going to most likely, that's going to be one section of the labor movement that's going to oppose this effort. Unfortunately, most likely, we'll see. But and I don't think we can, if they don't like the slogan tax Amazon, I think it would be a mistake to drop that slogan to cater to those conservative union leaders, because it's going to be such a popular slogan with everyone else. And most union members in other unions are going to agree that we should tax the richest man in the world and his corporation. We should offer jobs out of our ballot initiative. And I agree with what people said, by the way, that we should try to get whatever we can get through the city council, but have the threat of a ballot initiative as a backup in case the city council doesn't deliver a strong deal, which is what really helped us a lot with the $15 minimum wage campaign back in 2014. So I think when the labor leaders, if some of them oppose this or stay neutral, the key for us is to build as broad of a coalition as possible, as broad of a movement as possible, like Robert was just saying, like getting union members to support this, getting as many communities to support this so that we put maximum pressure on the union leaders to stand with us or not stand on the side. And same with the city council members. And I think that also really means, this is my last point, that we do really need a democratic coalition like people have talked about to make sure that we bring in as many groups on board, people feel represented, we're really listening to each other, and not just have one group just making all the announcements and deciding everything. We've got as much as possible to make this a democratic, united coalition. So this conference on the 25th, I think that's a good idea. And we should just really make sure it is a democratic conference where everyone has a say, where people, activists can really speak, and that conference is organized in a democratic manner where we elect a steering committee or whatever we need to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Rami. Last four speakers here. I just want to close the line.
Actually, I want to.
Okay, and Aram at the end.
Hi, my name is John McLeod. I'm a member of DSA. We all have a lot to be angry at Amazon for. Maybe it's the $11 billion in profits last year and negative 1% in federal income taxes paid, or the fact that they tried to buy our elections, or the fact that Jeff Bezos has more money than, I forgot how many Americans, but it's like the bottom third of all of America. But I think at the end of the day, I think negativity and anger are great for really motivating people for short bursts of activity, but they're not enough to motivate people, to inspire people to join something for a long period of time. And what we need to do in our messaging is make sure that it's not just tax Amazon, but rather that it's a positive vision for something more than that. We don't want to just stick it to the man. We want to make our society better. That's the only way it's going to motivate people to join for this movement for a long enough period of time, to put in enough energy. That's going to be the only way to defeat the forces that we're up against. And we all know, who they are. It's the most powerful corporation in the world. And so one thing, so we need to think about what that message is and what it is that we want to achieve. And I'm kind of surprised that I haven't heard us talk really a lot about climate. And we've heard a lot of great ideas so far. I mean, I even like the idea of reducing the sales tax, but at the end of the day, we're up in the biggest fight that we've ever been up against, and that's on climate. The IPCC has said that if we don't fundamentally transform our economy by 2030, if we don't achieve a 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, we're not going to reach 1.5 degrees warming of Celsius. It's going to be more than that. Right now we're on a planet where we're facing already like one of the greatest extinctions, mass extinctions of species we've ever seen. We're losing like 2.6% of the biomass of insects every year. So that means by 2100, we won't have any more insects on the planet. That means there will be no pollination of crops. That means we won't have any food, and we're all going to die out. We can't take 2 degrees warming or 2.5 degrees warming, and that's the course that we are on right now. We might not have any help in the White House. We don't know who's going to win the election this year, and despite knowing everything that's happening, we haven't had any action at the federal level. In fact, they have actually relaxed standards on automobiles. So we need to do everything that we possibly can on this issue. Seattle is supposedly one of the most liberal progressive cities in the entire country. That means that we need to do everything that we possibly can on climate. We need to set an example for other cities, because if we can't do it here, we can't do it anywhere else. On the federal level, we haven't been able to pass a carbon tax. So if we don't do everything that we possibly can on climate, not only will we be able to not look the generations that come after us in the eye, we'll be complicit in the greatest human rights catastrophe of entire history, and that's the extinction of our species and most other species on the planet. So yeah.
I'm Taylor. I'm a pretty new member of DSA, so I'm not going to talk too long because I don't have that much to say. But we've been talking a lot about social housing, building new social housing, and sort of the issues that with that, because that's going to be kind of a long-term goal, not helping everybody. And I think instead what we should be doing is, in tandem to that, is sort of creating systems to democratize and socialize our current housing stock. I don't know if my last building was sold while I lived there and ended up with new management. And then at the end of my lease, rents got jacked up and I had to move out. And I don't know anybody in Seattle who hasn't had that really happen to them. So yeah, in the back. And walking down my streets in Beacon Hill, it's like every other building is on sale or being sold, or you see whatever plans for the next sort of row house that's gonna go up. that's going to go for way more than everything else it's selling in the area. So I think we need to kind of take a look at what some cities in Europe are doing, which is setting up sort of right of first refusal. And so the tenants have an option to buy their homes before they're sold to some massive company that's going to tear them down and replace them with some sort of like weird modern box that's going to like retail for $1 million. So I think that's something we need to be looking into, sort of strengthening tenants unions. The guy from the tenant union spoke earlier, I'm not sure where he is, but we need to be like setting that up, strengthening that, and sort of democratizing housing in general, and allowing people who live there to make the decisions about what happens. Like if they don't want the building to be sold, it shouldn't be sold out from underneath them. And I think that's something like that definitely needs to happen, because it's happening in every neighborhood where these houses are just being sold, apartment buildings are being sold, and everyone has to move. And we keep moving further and further out of the city every year. Like you can't afford to live in this sort of core of the city anymore unless you work at Amazon or one of these big tech companies. And if you make close to minimum wage, you kind of have to go to the outskirts. And I think, funny enough, Venezuela did something kind of interesting where they allowed the state to buy housing if the tenants decided that's what they wanted. And so with all this money coming in from Amazon, you can sort of create low loans or something for tenants to buy their houses, buy their apartment buildings, and sort of we can slow down gentrification that way, because then you can kind of hang on to your home. You don't have to move out. That's about it.
My name is Manny Garcia. I'm a member of the 43rd Democrats, and I recently joined the DSA. And I think that the council should refer the big business tax to voters for the November 2020 this year election. That's where we're going to have the most diverse, the youngest electorate. If we just have council pass it, Amazon and other big businesses will buy petition signatures to get it on an off-year, off-season, low turnout, mostly white, more conservative election. So we have to choose when we have this vote, because if we don't have one of the city of Seattle, Amazon will pay for one when it's on their terms. I also, when I try to pitch folks on a tax on big business, I hear a lot of, well, won't Amazon just leave the city? And I think a good way to combat that, which is probably a bluff anyway, is just tax every head everywhere. So it doesn't matter if the job is in Seattle or not. The tax that big businesses in this city pay should be a function of all their heads, whether or not they're moving to Bellevue or keeping them here in Seattle.
Hi, I'm Aram. I'm with DSA. Just a couple of points about kind of the logistics. I mean, some of it may be a little bit repetitive. Regarding the ballot initiative and how hard it is fighting the big money, I think it's true if you look at the state level. I'm not so sure at the city level is the same thing applies. So, for example, the fracking bans and things like that you see are usually at the state level, and we're talking city level. So we need to keep that straight. Having said that, on the other hand, I read about the 75% approval of taxing Amazon. I think we should take that with a grain of salt. It is true that at the time that was the case, right after they dropped $1.5 million. But that happened at a very abstract level. They said, are you in favor of taxing Amazon? Sure. And everybody who said sure read their own priorities and agenda into what the money will be spent for. Once that money is allocated, we have a much bigger challenge in front of us. And I want us to be very clear, we do need to worry about, and that was also, the 75% poll was before they dropped a whole bunch of money on negative ads, which will happen in this case. So we do need to be very careful that we do not kind of live in a bubble and think that just because everybody we know and we socialize with is willing to pay money to house the homeless, that the average voter out there will do that. As progressive as the city of Seattle is, I think we do need to answer the what's in it for me to get to 50% of voters. And that's part of why I think things like transit could come into the issue a little bit more into play to help us answer the question of what's in it for me. Because I don't think the base right now is not big enough to win this in view of what the money and the negative advertise and the negative attack ads that are going to come our way. I just want to remind you guys of those of you who were around here about 10 years ago, the city council passed something to put a fee on plastic bags, and they turned it around into a bag tax, and this very city, all hippie and eco and progressive, voted to repeal the so-called bag tax. So altruism only goes so far when it comes to elections in your pocketbook.
So I've been following this for a while. I've been going to city council meetings, and I was downstairs in the Bertha Night room when they were meeting, and there was all these businesses, and they all agreed that we need the tax, the progressive tax. This is before it was voted down 7-9. And so I thought there was no way we were going to lose. We were going to go forward and get millions. I think it was like 35 million for housing for homeless people. And when we lost, Sawant uplifted my spirits because she said, we're going to out-organize them. And I think nowadays we have the ability to organize in ways we never had before. We have Facebook, we have spreadsheets, we have all the data available within a second. So why not use all those resources and gather people together with this data about how capital is distributed unequally and make it more equally distributed? We have the capacity to use shipping crates or to use new methods of like housing if we put our minds to it. And you know, even people are happy with the tiny houses. There needs to be like way more tiny houses. And so I think if we all get together and organize, then there can't be these little power plays of dividing us against environmentalists, against housing. Because, you know, I was there when Bezos had these weird, like, workers that were, like, supposed to be in a labor union. And they all wore these, like, hard hats and vests, like, during the yellow vest movement. So it was like, bam, like, there's a yellow vest movement in France, and here's one here, except they're conservative. And it's like these images that get stolen and twisted, and they call that a power play. To them that feels good, like a big shot of like whiskey. It like makes their soul drunk with happiness that they can confuse us. Like power to them is something that makes them feel good, but we speak truth, and truth will never be outdated. Like in 100 years, what we fought for here will be just as fresh. But the power moves that they made, people are going to say, wasn't that a shame that they got away with degrading the environment at that level? I mean, look at Greta Thunberg. She's getting rageful. And I hope the younger generation, now that they can organize, I hope that they make history so innocent that we realize in a flash that the smallest thing, like a bird covered in oil or with a plastic around its head, like becomes the center stage. Like social workers get paid equal. Or get paid a living wage because we rise the very smallest, and like the environment that's getting the most degraded, like if we had a live streaming of all the glaciers like melting, like that movie Ice, you could just flip on a channel and just watch it all day as a form of protest and say, look, that's the last time we're going to see that glacier, because all those images are the most important images, not some Andrew Cuomo on CNN blasting my eyes out, my ears with lies because he's some liberal Democrat. Because the lens of socialism is the lens. It's the lens that has the most dimension in the human condition of what it is to be hungry and homeless, and all those things need to be solved by candidates who are talking even in the fourth dimension of the 22nd century. Thanks.
Thank you. That was great. There have been a lot of people. We've been sitting quietly and politely for some time now. So if you want to and you're able, I invite you to stand up and stretch a little bit. Just move around, take a moment, some breaths. Discussion, people have laid out a lot of really big questions that are in front of us about the mechanism that we're going to use to hold businesses accountable to what they owe us already. We have talked about whether it's a ballot initiative, whether it's city council, if it's both. We've talked about involving other types of taxes or other mechanisms rather for making this a more popular thing for more people. We've talked a lot about the substance of it, what it should go toward. We've also said things around, who's going to access the benefits, like really important questions around that. And then some important questions internally for ourselves as we're moving forward about who's defining the agenda for these spaces, who's at the table or not, that are really big and are going to take some time and certainly more discussions to sort of land on some agreements around. So in the spirit of that moving us forward, I wanted to invite the speakers who spoke initially to just take a few minutes, like really a few minutes, to say, what are you taking away? What did you hear in this conversation today? If anyone is particularly moved to go first, let me know, otherwise I'll just go down the list.
I'll go first.
Yes, thank you.
Again, thank you all for being here and for sharing your ideas and your perspectives. This is a really important conversation, certainly not the end of it. I just want to highlight a few things that I got out of this conversation. One is that the framing of this, the messaging needs to be inclusive so that we can make sure, as many people said, that people can see how they benefit from it and maybe not even them personally, but how the community benefits from it, which I think also gets to a bigger point. When we talk about, well, let me finish. I'll come back to that. Tax relief, I think, is a really important part of the conversation, needs to be part of the conversation. People need to understand that, particularly for low-income folks who are struggling, who are losing their homes because they can't keep up with property taxes, if there is some element of this package, of the thing that we pass, that we get on an initiative, where there will be some property or sales tax relief that comes from this. After all, the whole point of this is to reduce the regressivism of our tax structure. That's also going to be a really important part of how I think we can get more people to participate and buy into and appreciate what we're trying to do here. We have to make sure that racial equity is at the center of this conversation. I hate to say it, but this is an awfully white crowd here. And so we have to make sure that communities of color not just are invited to participate, but are actively engaged in agenda setting, in priority setting, in having the conversation about what the mechanism is, who gets to be involved in this conversation, because the people being most impacted by the challenges in this city are people of color, and they need to be at the table. And then the last thing I want to say is, well, I want to say two more things. One is that I am a former Human Rights Commissioner for the Seattle Human Rights Commission. I was part of a conversation happening when the initial employee hours tax was being discussed. There is a national alliance of human rights cities that is really worried about what is happening in municipalities across the country where large corporations are coming in trying to influence tax policy. And they are worried because of what it means for being able to provide services to the most vulnerable in those cities. So there is another thread we can pull in terms of the messaging about what this is about. This is about finding an equitable way to finance public services in our city, especially when we have so many people who are vulnerable and being pushed out and who are sleeping on the streets. So I don't think it's a small thing to say that the messaging should be a little bit more expansive than than just tax Amazon. It should also include messaging about building community and why we are trying to do this. And my last point is that the reason I think that's important is because whenever we do organizing, whenever we do particularly organizing around trying to change systems, which is what we're trying to do here, it's not just about tearing down the existing system. It is also about what we are building in its place. And so I think that needs to be part of the conversation that we're having. When we talk about racial equity, I will just use the, restorative justice and racial justice organizing as an example. We're talking about spending 20% of our energy on what we're trying to tear down, but we need to spend the rest of our energy on what we're building. And so I think that needs to be included in how we think strategically about what the messages are to the community, particularly to the folks who aren't in this room and don't just get why this is so important. So I'm going to stop there. This conversation will continue, and I want to thank all of you for being part of it.
Thank you. I, first of all, agree with everything that Tammy just said. And I'm going to use my couple of minutes to have the last word. Not really. Just a few people have mentioned the poll that showed that 75% of people want to tax big business. I just wanted to put that in a little bit of context. So what I kind of gather from talking with a few people who were involved in that poll is that it wasn't actually designed to give us an accurate sense of like where things are at, because we might want to run something and how, you know, strong is our messaging even against counter messaging, blah, blah, blah. It was kind of a poll run as a fuck you to the chamber and Amazon so that they could get a headline that said Seattle wants to tax big business. So I would take it with a grain of salt. So I just looked back at the Stranger article that reported it. So the question was actually, according to the poll, 75% of respondents support the council passing a law that, quote, raises local taxes on big businesses and the wealthy to help pay for vital services. And the reason why they included big business and the wealthy is that it's kind of spreading it over people who want an income tax. So just keep in mind that, like, it's still a great talking point. We should all be out there saying 75% of Seattleites want to tax big business, right? But let's not fool ourselves about what that poll actually shows and be overconfident about what that support looks like when the counter messages start happening. The other thing is just to respond to the conversation about like what the money should be used for. Obviously, as part of the Transit Riders Union, like I want to tax big business to fund public transit. However, just some context to be aware of, there is going to be a transit ballot measure sometime this year, perhaps on the August instead of the November ballot, but there's a bus service measure that is expiring next year, so it needs to be replaced anyway, and so there's conversations going on now, like between the city and the county, about doing a ballot measure to fund bus service, probably countywide, so it would be on the county ballot. It would almost certainly be a sales tax, so it's a regressive tax, not something we love. But just as we're thinking about how and whether to include transit in a measure like this, we should definitely be thinking about how that could interact with that. You know, potentially there's a way to wrap in money for free transit or, you know, transit fare subsidies into something like this without, you know, kind of having it mess with a transit service measure, but that's just something to think about. And I guess the final thing I'll say, and I don't think this really impacts what we're doing, but the income tax that has been referenced a couple of times that's been moving its way through the courts, we are expecting to get the Supreme Court to make a decision on that probably early 2021, but there's a small potential that it could happen at the end of this year, which would be a little bit weird, and it's just something to keep in mind.
It's always a very ominous welcome. Yes, it's wonderful to be a part of. Really grateful to DSA for organising this. And I'm grateful to all the work that Socialist Alternative and Councilmember Sawant have done to push forward. And I know that they've done a ton of work in December to get us there and are kind of now in the driving seat. To some extent. I think someone called it the elephant in the room, and I'm glad it was named here. And so I think my final closing comments are directed mostly to my good friend Adam and other friends from SA in the room like John and Emily. And to say that, like, I really mean it when I say, like, I'm deeply grateful for all the work that you all have put in, and that you're launching on Monday, and that, like, I don't think any of the rest of us would have got our shit together enough in time to file something in February. I tried, others tried, and I didn't see it happening. And because of your work, I now see it happening. But it kind of puts you in the seat of having a lot of responsibility to do it right. And so kind of thinking about things about how to do it right. I think one question we've heard again and again is the worst case scenario is we've got labour and building trades in opposition. any strategic campaign, you know, you look at your spectrum of allies and you've got your opposition, and one key question is, how do you neutralize your opposition? So I really hope that somebody already has had conversations with folks, leaders from the building trades, and just simply said, what do you need in this policy to not oppose it? And maybe it's like, you know, we need prevailing wage and wage parity and priority hire, and that'll guarantee it's union labor, and that will stop us opposing it. Now, that's not going to guarantee that they're going to stop opposing it, but key element of justice is nothing about us without us. So if we're designing a policy that has major impacts on labor, but not including them from the beginning, I think that's a strategic error that'll come back to bite us in the ass. Already glad a couple of people have mentioned the polls. Confirmation bias is one of the most well-developed psychological things that we all suffer from, and history is full of polls that have flipped very quickly when tens of millions of corporate dollars pour in. So I wouldn't seek too much confidence in that poll. Again, SA moving forward with the activist conference on the 25th, and we've heard a lot about the need to kind of build a movement of movements, a coalition, and I really want to encourage our friends from SA to think about how to do that in a really inclusive way in the lead up to the activist conference on January 25th, because I know a lot of decisions are getting made now. So who's planning that committee? Who's being invited on to plan that event? Who's not being invited? And you know, if this is going to be racially just, how many people of color are on that committee? How many leaders from organizations that are rooted in and led by communities of color are part of that planning process? I think is really key, because a genuine coalition can't be a tokenistic coalition. It's not a logo on a website. It means being at the table, actually shaping the policy and actually shaping the strategy. And I hope there's still space for that, as much as SA have really led the way, which I'm deeply grateful for. I think to actually build a meaningful coalition, not a tokenistic one, we need to have space at the table where people can still shape things. And that's, especially, as I said, especially key if this is going to involve communities of colour who might not have been at the table so far. And I think that's it. But yeah, this is exciting. This is exactly what our society needs. The election results were massively hopeful. It's great to have Councilmember Morales in the room, and great to see Councilmember Sawant win with such an overwhelming majority despite Amazon's all-out attacks. And let's do it. Let's tax Amazon and build the world we need to see.
I'm just going to be really brief and not respond to the majority of things at all. In fact, I think I'm only going to make one point, which is when you spoke at the beginning, Alec, you said something that I think was vital, which was about when we're talking about fighting for climate justice, and when we're talking about a Green New Deal. That was a victory that a Green New Deal is a concept that millions and millions of people in this country, and then way more than that around the world, are talking about, and it's defined. Obviously there's different ideas about what it is, but it's clear that you have the exact facts and everything, but it's clear that it is an actual plan to actually address climate change and do what we need to do in order to survive. And so making sure when we're talking about that when we're fighting for these critical things, as small as they are so critical, that we are aware of that. And the reason I wanted to come in about it is because, like, I hope it rings true and isn't seeming out of nowhere or anything, but like the reason I'm doing that is this, like, excited about this, beyond just like it will make a difference to have housing or to have transit or whatever we agree on in the coming years, is because it's what other people have said. We're building our power, and we're building our power recognizing that, like, until the moment where us and a whole bunch of other people who are not CEOs, like, own the top energy companies and all the other companies that contribute to war and industry and to oil and to all, like, you know, everything that contributes to climate change. Like, we can't control what we don't own, and that's for me, that's ultimately what I'm fighting for. And that movement for that starts right here, right now.
Adam, and then Chris will close us out.
I'm gonna set this here, hopefully it doesn't disappear. No? Okay, good. So first of all, thank you so much again for inviting Councilmember Sawant, and we recognize that it's only because of the hard work that y'all did donating, sacrificing your time, door knocking, that I now get to be the elephant, I guess, in the room. I'm super grateful for that. So basically the conversation reflected in large part the two organizing meetings that we have had so far, and really appreciate Alec's recognition that it was not through any effort to steamroll. It was the sheer, strike while the fucking iron's hot, because if you don't, it gets cold and then you can't do what you want to do anymore, right? So we've had two organizing meetings. They've been as inspiring as this meeting has been as well. We also want unity, and this is the kind of, but it is a question, and we want the broadest possible coalition, but it is a question on what basis? On what basis do we want a coalition? We want a coalition that is going to be based on the kind of bold demands and proposals that we heard from everybody here. Make no mistake, we've got a lot of folks who are coming on the 13th from unions. We've got, I don't know if David Parsons is able to be there, but UAW 4121 will have a speaker. They've been at all the organizing meetings. Paul Lukacek from WFC 1488. We've got a lot of DSA. We're excited to have speakers. But we also reached out to the King County Labor Council, to Nicole Grant, to offer her a chance to speak. We reached out to Monty Anderson, offer him a chance to speak. I know, unfortunately, Katie is not able to come speak, but we want TRU. We want all of these views to be heard by the broadest section of people. But at the end of the day, we want to build a fighting movement that's able to pressure our councilman, and I include Kshama, of course, is from the movement and emerged out of the movement, but we need to pressure our council members, and of course, we need to, at the same time, be able to inspire people to come out. So on that basis, out of the organizing meetings, and then out of other conversations that we've had, including with Alec and Nikita Oliver, with folks from Got Green, James Williams, this question, and I believe, Alec is going to be speaking, or a Got Green / 350 speaker on Monday. We really do believe that this activist conference on the 25th offers the broadest possible space so that the movement, we're not talking about 5 people, because let's be honest, you can have a coalition, you can even have a steering committee, but how many people have been in organizations or in movements where all of a sudden a 5 organization or person steering committee who never shows up to the meetings gets to decide critical components of what we're fighting for and how we're fighting for. We don't want that kind of a coalition. We don't want that kind of a movement. We want a coalition and a movement beholden to the bases, beholden to the people who desperately need to tax Amazon for social housing, to tax Amazon for a Green New Deal, to tax Amazon for basic things that we need. And on that basis, what we'd like to have at this activist conference is a broad discussion. We're starting at 10 a.m. at Washington. I'll put it in your account. 10 a.m. at Washington. I believe we got it from 10 to 4. It's going to be the first. Hopefully, it'll only be the only one. Because let's also just realize we don't have a lot of time. We got to get this thing filed by February at the latest. If we start collecting signatures too late, if we wait too long, we empower the council to potentially stall and then negate our grassroots movement. So at this conference, we'd like to have a wide-ranging discussion. And in reality, we'd like to have a few proposals already able to be voted upon potentially by not a few people on the steering committee, but by 2, 3, 4, 500, however many people all of our organizations can get out, and out of this conference to elect potentially a steering committee. But a steering committee that steers the general, but the activist conference, the first one, the second one, the third one, that's where major decisions are made. That's where we decide how much. That's where we decide where it goes. That's where we decide, the thresholds. There's all kinds of great questions out there. And they're not principled questions. I totally agree. We're not going to throw away the opportunity to tax big business because we want to get revenge. But let's not forget, there wasn't just one poll that was done recently. The best barometer of where people stand on tax Amazon was the fucking elections. And we won. So now let's build a movement to tax Amazon as quickly as possible. I'm just gonna end by saying we also want a lot of stuff, and this is we are not limited for choices precisely because of how brutal capitalism has been to working people. So we want a lot of stuff. We also have to be worried about a Christmas tree kind of thing that opens up numerous attacks from others. But at the end of the day, these are all things that the movement should decide upon. And I'll just wrap up by actually pitching something that's not for Tax Amazon, that's not this event on the 13th, it's not the activist conference. At 2 p.m., Councilmember Sawant is going to be putting forward this Monday a resolution that says no fucking war on Iran. And please, if you can come, support that, because there's a lot of struggles we're fighting. You didn't actually, the resolution doesn't say fucking, but that's just my little ad there, because it is so important that we all get together to organize to fight for taxing Amazon, but also to fight against invasions, to fight so that the planet's not on fire anymore. And so thank you so much for allowing us to voice our views, to respond also to the amazing things that people came up with here. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you on Monday and in the struggle as we fight the tax big business bill.
And before you leave the stage, I don't mean to heckle you, but I want to ask a question, or make that kind of point to what you said. So I think it's awesome, the activist conference, and that's where like that democratically making decisions and the movement making decisions. And I heard you say that people are going to be voting on proposals at that conference. So the people that are making those proposals are making decisions because they're deciding what the movement is voting on. So I just think it's really key that you have the right people in the room shaping those proposals on the 25th to build that broad coalition.
Perfect. I'm really glad that Alec mentioned that. If I could get just 30 seconds to just respond concretely. Yeah, I mean, that's the aspiration that we vote on it. Probably the more likely reality is that that's the first one and that there's another one. I mean, there's a lot of ideas and a lot of viewpoints that need to be heard and represented. And there's also, we've been in talks with DSA, and and concretely, we're setting up a kind of a planning or a committee, whatever you want to call it, to plan the 25th. We've invited you and 350 to be part of it. Nikita, DSA is going to be part of that planning committee. Other organizations as well. I don't recall off the top of my head, but we also totally agree. We want the 25th to be organized also democratically. But again, let's remember, at the end of the day, what we want is the movement in the driver's seat, and that's going to come from the broadest possible voices, hearing and opining, but also voting and deciding decisively, not leaving that to a small group who could could have other interests. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everyone who spoke in today. I'm humbled by my brilliant and passionate comrades that are going to fight with us, and we're going to win. So, a couple things that are coming up. As has been mentioned, on Monday, Councilmember Sawant's inauguration. Be there. January 13th, Monday, 6 p.m. at Washington Hall. And then the upcoming conference on the 25th as well. We will send info out. Make sure that you signed up at the front so that we can get you information about upcoming events and fight and win together. Thank you, everyone.